In this video, we're going to take a look at an 8x8 or 8-wheeled drive Tatra off-road truck and explain how it works, particularly the transmission, the differentials, the traction systems and the suspension. So this is the truck. It's a Tatra 815 model year 2008 8-wheel drive. Both front axles steer, and you look at the second front axle, that's steering at a tighter radius than the front because it's got to turn through a tighter radius. The vehicle itself is not Tatra's most hardcore off-road. There's actually more hardcore versions which we'll look at a little bit later in the video, but we can see here the excellent suspension system which we'll explain a bit later on as well. But for the moment, let's try and get the thing bogged so we can take a look at the four-wheel drive traction systems. So we've got the truck in road mode, so it's 8x4 driving the rear wheels only, and you can see that the front wheels aren't turning, but they are definitely bogged, and rear wheels both spun. And I've got the driver now just to start spinning the wheels. You can see only one wheel is turning out of those four on this side. And if we go around the other side of the vehicle, we find that no wheels are spinning. So despite the fact it's got 8 wheels, only one wheel is actually spinning. We're going to explain why that is using a few diagrams and videos in a moment. Now you can see here why the vehicle is stuck. Look at those wheels, they're sunk right in, and of course the truck is tilted over to one side so there's even more weight on it. Here's another view. You can see it's a road mode, 2 rear wheels on the right spin, and then just that right front starts to spin. Now I've got the driver to engage the first switch, which brings the front axle into play and also ensures that both rear axles have drive. So you can see we've now got one front wheel spinning and both rear right spinning. If we go around the other side though, we find that the 2 back wheels are doing nothing. One of the front wheels is doing nothing, the front left is spinning. So we actually still don't have enough drive to move the vehicle out, but we do now have 4 wheels out of the 8 spinning as opposed to only 1. And here's another view. You can see 3 wheels spinning on the right and the front right not doing anything. Okay, now what we do, we engage the second switch and that gives us cross-axle locking differentials on the rear, and as you can see the vehicle now has sufficient traction to drive out because we have got 6 out of the 8 wheels turning, and those 2 rear wheels which had good traction are now able to work as well, and you can see pretty much nothing is going to stop it from this point onwards. And here it is again, so there's the spin, and then we engage the second set of lockers, which is the cross-axle lockers on the rear axle. You can see the vehicle really just drives straight out and no problem at all. Okay, so what's going on with all of these locking differentials and everything else? Well, here's how it all works. So this is a conceptual diagram of how the drivetrain works. We're going to start with the chassis, then we're going to put on the front of it an axle. We're going to call it axle group A, and then B, and then C, and then D, and the rears have the double axle for extra carrying capacity, the double wheel for extra carrying capacity. Then we're going to take a transfer case, and I'm not going to put the whole engine in, and that will take the power from the engine. We're going to put a cross-axle differential at the front. Now the purpose of that is to allow the left and the right wheels to spin at different speeds going around a corner. We need one on axle A, and we need one on B, and one on C, and one on D. Now we've got to power all of these axles, and the way we do that is we run a shaft from the transfer case to the first differential, and then we pass through to the second differential. However, we have a problem because going around the corner, axle group C will travel a longer distance and therefore go faster than axle group D, so we need another differential in the middle which is called a power divider, and then that allows C and D to go at different speeds. Now we're going to solve the problem of B and A going at different speeds to C and D by simply not driving them at all, so that we've got a front axle engagement here, and generally these wheels are not driven in road mode, which is 8x4, 8 wheels, 4 driven, and that shows that engagement there. So this is the vehicle in road mode, and what it's showing us is that the front wheels are not driven at all, they're disconnected at this point. And the rear wheels are driven, shown by the green, and we've got the power divider here which is allowing axle C to spin at a different speed to axle D. Now, why is that important? Well, here's the vehicle, eight wheels and 4 axles. When it goes around the corner, you can see that every single one of those wheels has a different arc going around the corner, and what that means is that each of them have to be driven at a different speed, and a differential allows that. Now, I've got other videos where I explain differentials in more detail, but that is why this vehicle needs so many differentials and so many power dividers, is because it's got so many wheels and so many axles. So now we come to the problem with road mode, and it is this. On a normal surface, bitumen, level ground, all 4 wheels have pretty much the same weight on them, therefore traction, and therefore all 4 of them will drive, no problem. When we get to the point where we have maybe some mud on one wheel, as you see exactly in the video, then this wheel becomes much easier to spin than the other 3, and what happens is that it just spins uselessly due to the differential, because the differential is lazy, and the drive comes down here and the differential says, okay, which wheel is easiest to turn? This one with high traction or that one with low traction? Well, clearly this one's easier to turn, so I'm going to turn that one. And then the same thing happens with the power divider at the back. The power divider goes, well, what's easiest to turn, this axle or that axle? The answer is that axle, because it's got a wheel with very little traction on it. So you end up with, whilst all 4 wheels could be driven, just one actually being driven. And as you see, out of the 8 wheels the vehicle's got, 1 spins and the vehicle goes nowhere. So here's the first solution, which is the first switch, and that is locking the rear center and adding the fronts, and that's what those 2 X's mean, and the exact location of the X's are very important. You can see one is between the rear axles, which represents the power divider, and the other one is between the rear axle group and the front axle group. Now, whilst this is an 8x8, this appears to be the switch off a 6x6, but it does the same sort of thing. So what does that actually do for us? Well, it does 2 things. First of all, it locks the center differential here, or the power divider, and then also it brings in the front axle into play. And now what we have is a situation where at least one wheel out of A, B, C and D must turn. So we've got much more traction than we did before. Previously, we only had the rear 4 wheels being driven, and if any one of those slipped, you were going nowhere. Now we've got to have at least one wheel driven out of A, B, C and D. So what does that look like once we started to do that? Well, we weren't out of the mud yet. What we found was wheel D, the upper wheel here, didn't really have much traction, so that spun. That was already spinning, and then we had diagonal wheels spinning here as well. So that might have got us out of traction, but the truck was really quite badly bogged, even though it didn't look it. So that wasn't quite enough to move us out, but in most cases it would have been, and you will see another example where it was later on. Okay, 4 out of 8 wheels spinning, 1 per axle. 8 wheels, 4 spinning, still not enough. So we're still stuck. So what do we do? Well, fortunately the truck's got another trick up its sleeve, and if we look at switch 2, that's an X, and an X representing the cross-axle differential lock here and here, which I put in as a lock. So what does that do for us? Well, that forces this wheel to turn at the same speed as that wheel, and that wheel to turn at the same speed as that wheel, and that means we're not going to get that useless spinning. So what that means now, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wheels trying to bring us forwards, and these 2 aren't really doing very much for us, and that is enough to get the vehicle out of its problem. Now, if you want to be really technical about diffs, it is a torque splitter, equal torque left and right when it's an open diff, etc. We're not going to get into that in this video. I've done that elsewhere. Now here's the truck again crossing a little ditch, which is pretty straightforward for it, given it's got such a long wheelbase and so many wheels driving. So you might think that is pretty straightforward for all vehicles. Well, maybe not. So we actually went and got a Discovery, an early model, Model 1, and you can see what happens. Now, this doesn't have its centre differential locked for reasons I'm not sure about, but you can see it's come to a halt despite the fact that the engine is revving. So what's going on there? If we go around the side of the vehicle, we see those 2 wheels aren't spinning, but we can see that this wheel is spinning uselessly, and in effect it's one-wheel drive. All of the other 3 wheels are doing nothing. So then if we get the driver to lock the centre differential, which is very similar to what the Tatra has, then he is able to drive out, and there he is getting a bit of advice. Now with the centre differential locked, the vehicle is able to drive over the ditch without any further trouble. Same principle with locking centre diff as you have in the Tatra. Now I said earlier on this is not Tatra's most off-road focused truck, and you can tell that. Look at the front wheels, they're singles, like that, just a single tyre, but look at the rear wheels, they are doubles for extra load carrying capacity. But a really focused off-road truck wouldn't have those wheels at the back, and this is why. So why do off-road tracks have one set of wheels at the back as opposed to two? Well, there's two reasons for that. The first one is drag. So with the case of the singles, the back wheels follow exactly the front wheels, and therefore in compression terrains like snow, sand, mud, you've got one set of tracks and minimal drag. Now, if we look at a dual axle, that's the front wheels. We add in the back wheels and we've got maybe twice as much in terms of ruts, much more drag, and therefore this vehicle will tend to struggle in terrains relative to that vehicle because there's much more drag. Now the other reason is this: you can actually get debris caught between the two wheels on the rear, and that can be very difficult to dislodge. For example, rocks often, but sometimes sticks as well. Now Tatra, one of the world's specialists in four-wheel drive trucks, including racing in the Dakar Rally and other truck competitions. And one thing you'll notice is that all of their trucks for real off-road use have single tyres like this four-wheel drive version you can see here. Now if we look at this 8x8, it runs single wheels and they're all exactly in line to minimise rolling resistance on soft ground. We look at this one going up a 45-degree slope, that's 100%. Take a look at the front axle, see how that's canted in. We're going to explain why that is in a moment. Now over the top you can see that load share suspension working, we'll come to that. And here's the advantage of having huge tyres, you get over that 60 centimetre just pure vertical drop. And coming up the other side, that's why vehicles run high profile tyres with a lot of tyre and very little rim or wheel in the middle to be able to get them up and over things like that. And here's the advantages of 8 wheels over a very long wheelbase. You can see even if one axle is completely suspended, the other 3 can still take the weight and move the vehicle forwards. Now one disadvantage of 8 wheels is steering radius, so Tatra do in fact have a rear wheel steer. Here it is without the rear wheel steer, 30 metre turning radius. Now the rear wheels start to steer as well, and you can see the turning radius is much decreased and it's only 22 metres now, which is a huge difference. And you can also use the 8-wheel steer capacity to move the vehicle sideways, as you can see, which will generally help manoeuvrability and also off-road performance. Now let's get back to our 815 and watch the suspension work on the front set of axles and the rear set of axles as it goes over this gravel mound, and we're going to explain what's going on there and how that works. It's called a load share off-road suspension system and it's pretty clever. So this video is from Tatra and it shows a 6x6 being built up as an animation. So there's a fixed chassis tube right down the centre, which is unusual, but what's even more unusual is we've kind of got this independent suspension at the front, and that's due to the fact that the differential is not what you'd normally expect to find in a car, but it's fairly usual on off-road trucks, and that allows these stub axles or shorter axles just to pivot up and down, giving great flex. That green part there is actually the differential, the red is the transfer case, which I showed in my earlier diagram, and then we've got 2 more differentials and a power divider between the 2 back axles. Those are air bellows which help take the load on the rear suspension, and then the animation finishes by putting it all together to show you that it is a 6x6 truck, same thing as an 8x8, just needs another axle. Okay, let's now explain what's going on with that load share suspension. So now you can see how the independent suspension at the front angles the wheels up when not under load, and going over cambered ground like this actually moulds the wheels to the track. So here's how the suspension works, and it's a load share system. So we've got one axle group in the front and we've got this massive leaf spring assembly here which connects the front axle of a group to the rear axle group, and it pivots at this point in the centre, and the same at the back. And this is how it works when you go over a bump. as one wheel is forced up, this one is forced down, and the same happens at the rear. And what that means is that each wheel is forced to be in contact with the ground as much as possible, which is best for stability and for traction. So that's what we call a load share off-road system, and it's very effective for traction and stability off-road. So now we're going to get the truck stuck again, and you'll be able to see the load share suspension working as I just described there. As the front right wheel goes down into the ditch, and it's in road mode at the moment, so only the rear wheel's driving. And that's enough resistance to actually stop the vehicle moving, because the front four wheels are not actually driven at all. Now if we take a look at what's happening here, I've just got the driver to rev the engine up a bit. None of those four wheels are turning, and what we find is, as before, one of the rear wheels is turning, so back into that 1/8 situation again, just one wheel turning. Now if we engage switch 1, that brings the front axle into play, so he'll do that. We're not putting the cross axle lockers in, and that is, in this particular situation, enough to get us going, whereas in the previous one we actually needed to lock both rear axles as well. And here's another view as we engage the front axle, bring that into play, and also lock the power divider between the rear two axles, and you can see the vehicle's able to drive out nice and easily. So a few specs. The engine's a 12.7 litre V8 diesel, 325 kilowatts, 2100 newton meters of torque. The vehicle weighs around 15 tonnes tare, 41 tonnes GVM, gives about 26 tonnes of payload, and it can tow 20 tonnes, 7.5 tonnes on the front axles, 13 tonnes on the rear axles max loads. Now the transmission is a 5-speed manual but with a splitter, so in effect that's 10 forward gears and 2 reverse gears, and there's the splitter in operation moving from high and low. Now there's the clutch, as usual with trucks, steering column in the way, there's the brake, and there's the accelerator. The truck has 420 litres of diesel and 67 litres of AdBlue for emissions purposes. Trucks, please comment. It is quite hard to find reliable information about how they work and the specifications. In any case, I hope you found this video useful. If you've got any questions or other comments, please use the comment section, and thank you for watching.